The atmosphere in the arena shifted long before the music hit, a subtle disruption that felt less like a wrestling show and more like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm.
Ow.
The main event had just concluded in a way that left the crowd feeling hollow. A disqualification that resolved nothing, leaving the ring canvas stained and the air bitter. Commentary stopped speaking to fill the dead air. It just let the uncomfortable murmur of the crowd breathe, amplifying the lack of closure. Then the lights didn't just cut out in a theatrical fade. They flickered violently like a power surge struggling against the grid. The Titantron didn't display a graphic. It went pitch black. For 10 agonizing seconds, 18,000 people sat in absolute darkness, stripped of their visual distractions. There was no pyrotechnics cue, no familiar guitar riff to signal a savior, just the hum of the ventilation and the nervous shifting of bodies in plastic seats. Security guards near the barricade tightened their posture, hands resting near their belts, looking at each other with genuine confusion. This wasn't on the run sheet. The production truck usually orchestrates chaos with military precision, but this felt raw, unrehearsed, and dangerously quiet. A low, distorted drone began to rise from the speakers, a sound that wasn't music, but a frequency that vibrated in the chest. It was the sound of something impending, something that wasn't meant to be enjoyable but was absolutely necessary. The darkness held the audience hostage, forcing them to confront the vacuum left at the top of the division, a void that had been growing for months. The unease wasn't about who was coming. It was about the realization that the show had lost control of itself. When the first silhouette appeared on the stage, the lighting rig remained dormant, refusing to paint the scene in the usual vibrant colors of the brand. Only a single, harsh spotlight cut through the gloom, hitting the concrete floor rather than the figure itself, creating a stark, Noir-like contrast. The smoke machines weren't pumping out celebratory clouds. It was a thin, cold mist that clung to the ankles of the person standing there. Then the familiar Irish melody played, but it was slowed down, distorted into a minor key that stripped away the heroism and left only the emotional scars. Becky Lynch stepped into the light, but she didn't pose, didn't hold up a finger, and didn't play to the gallery. She looked exhausted, not physically, but spiritually. She walked with a heaviness that suggested she was carrying the weight of every title reign and every betrayal on her back. The reaction wasn't a pop. It was a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen out of the building, followed by a low, rumbling roar of disbelief. People didn't jump out of their seats to cheer. They stood up slowly, hands over their mouths, trying to process if this was real. The cameras caught faces in the front row, not smiling, but wide-eyed and stunned. It was the look of witnessing a ghost walk back into the living room. Michael Cole's voice cracked on the broadcast, not with his usual scripted enthusiasm, but with a genuine tremble of uncertainty. He asked his broadcast partners if they knew this was happening, and the silence from the color commentators spoke louder than any catchphrase. She walked down the ramp without looking at a single fan, her eyes locked on the empty ring, as if it were a crime scene she was returning to investigate. The silence of the ring? Entering the ring, she bypassed the stairs and slid under the bottom rope, a movement devoid of the superstar flair she once perfected, favoring efficiency over spectacle. She stood in the center of the canvas, surrounded by the ghosts of matches past, and simply looked at the hard camera with a gaze that pierced through the screen. There was no microphone in her hand. She didn't need one. The silence that fell over the arena was heavier than the noise had been. It was the suffocating silence of a courtroom before the verdict is read. She paced the squared circle, looking at the turnbuckles, running her hand along the top rope as if checking for dust, reacquainting herself with the cage she had built. The audience began to ripple with a strange anxiety, unsure if they should chant or remain quiet. Was she going to speak? Was she going to fight? Or was she just here to remind them of what they lost? The champion, who had been celebrating moments ago on the ramp, was now frozen at the top of the stage, clutching the belt a little tighter, the color draining from her face. This wasn't a challenge. It was an eviction notice. Becky finally looked up, her expression hardened by time away. It wasn't the face of the underdog anymore. It was the face of a veteran who realized the landscape had shifted and decided to burn the map. She didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She just stared, penetrating the lens, breaking the fourth wall without saying a word. The production team cut 2 shots of the crowd, showing divided loyalties, some crying, overwhelmed by the return, while others looked angry, feeling the shift in tone. The narrative had changed in an instant. The playful banter of the show was dead. Chaos behind the curtain. As the broadcast faded to black, the real drama ignited behind the curtain, away from the prying eyes of the audience, but felt in the shaking infrastructure of the roster. The gorilla position, usually a place of high fives and adrenaline dumps, was a morgue of stunned silence and frantic whispering. Producers scrambled with headsets, shouting over one another, trying to figure out how the rundown had been hijacked and who authorized the music cue. The women's locker room, previously a cohesive unit of competitors, fractured instantly. You could feel the walls closing in. The younger talent, who had spent the last year building their names in the absence of a titan, looked at the monitors with a mix of fear and resentment. They knew what this meant. Oxygen is a finite resource in this industry, and Becky Lynch just inhaled the entire room. There were no warm embraces or welcome back. Banners, there was only the sharp, metallic taste of competition. The current champion threw her title belt onto a travel crate, clang echoing through the hallway, a sound of frustration that no scriptwriter could pen. Agents were on their phones, likely calling creative directors and executives, trying to spin a narrative they didn't control. The return wasn't just a moment for the fans. It was a disruption of the ecosystem. Alliances that had held firm for months began to show hairline fractures. In the hallway, Seth Rollins was seen leaning against a wall, not celebrating, but looking at the floor with a complex expression, a mix of pride and worry. He knows better than anyone that when the man comes around, the line between character and person blurs until it vanishes. The domestic tranquility is over. The war has come home. The cost of the crown. The dust settles, but the unease remains, hanging over the wrestling world like a fog that won't lift. This wasn't about reclaiming a gold belt or selling t-shirts. Tonight was a testament to the addiction of the spotlight and the inability to let go. We often romanticize the return of a hero, expecting it to fix the broken parts of the story, but we rarely ask what broke the hero in the first place. Becky Lynch didn't come back to save the division. She came back because the silence of a normal life became louder than the roar of the stadium. The tragedy of this night isn't in the conflict to come, but in the realization that peace was never an option for her. She is a soldier who cannot function without a war, a creator who destroys her own peace to build a legacy. As the arena empties and the janitorial staff begins to sweep away the confetti of lesser celebrations, the image that burns in the mind is not her entrance, but her eyes. They were cold. They were detached. They were the eyes of someone who knows that this return is the beginning of the end, for someone perhaps the roster, perhaps herself. We cheered because we wanted the moment, but we failed to see the warning label attached to it. The lights go out in the arena one last time, leaving the empty ring in darkness. The lingering question isn't who will she fight. It is something far more terrifying. What is she willing to sacrifice this time? Because looking at her tonight, the answer seems to be absolutely everything. And that truth should scare us more than it excites us.